There was an enthralling report by Yale University released last week, and there was a Dr. Sonnenberg in charge of it. So he and his team, they sought to assess the severity of the impact of sanctions on Russia since February 2002, since its illegal war of aggression against Ukraine commenced on a full scale. Of course, Russia's been invading since 2014, but it's only now that they try to conquer the whole country, not just the Crimean Peninsula, Luhansk, and Donetsk regions. Um, anyway, so the report concluded that the damage to the Russian economy was indeed severe. Now, I'm circumspect because the possibility of wishful thinking. Westerners who support democracy, human rights, Ukraine's right to independence, might be tempted to delude themselves into thinking this is harming Russia more than it really is. There could be an element of wishful thinking here, thinking this will bring Putin to his knees, and this will bring an end to this war of aggression or things like that. So I wonder whether they're sometimes optimistic. But anyway, they have striven to be objective and analyze this in as a detached manner they possibly can. Now, they often say about statistics that what they show, they're like bikinis, because what they show is interesting, but what they hide is vital. Russia has notably classified a huge amount of economic data. So these are state secrets. Why? I suppose because they're just so embarrassing and demoralizing. As they don't want a pundit, and they don't want Westerners to be able to see how badly their sanctions have actually hurt Russia. Um, and perhaps I shouldn't say Westerners, because non-Western countries like the Republic of Korea, Japan, Singapore have courageously stepped up to the plate and sanctioned the aggressor, partly for fear that it will embolden China to attack them. So the trade figures were compiled by speaking to banks, various companies, consultants, trade partners of Russia. So, I mean, they might be necessarily approximate. But anyway, the report concludes that yes, Russia's made of billions of dollars, but that's not much use if you can't buy the items you need at any price. Now, they have tried circumventing Western sanctions by getting, and they've been publicly warned by the United States. If you do that, they'll be held to pay. There'll be sanctions against you. So Kazakhstan is abiding by these sanctions. So, the ninth largest country in the world in area, almost 20 million people, so can stand up to Russia to a limited extent. But the Kazakhs got spooked by the precedent set by this invasion of Ukraine. Putin and his cronies have often publicly scorned Kazakhstan's right to exist, and the Kazakhs are worried that they could be invaded. They've got a large Russian ethnic minority, particularly along their northern frontier, neighboring Russia, and these people are of dubious loyalty, of divided loyalty, which is why Kazakh promotes ethnic Russians high in the military, intelligence services, or government ministries. So they're doubling their defense budget for that reason. But Kazakhstan is no longer cooperating with Russia on this one, and the Russians are openly sour about that one. Um, so yeah, trying to get around sanctions is not particularly working for them. So business has shrunk in Russia dramatically, and it seems that Russia will not be able to replace the businesses which have either halted operations or left the country altogether, Western businesses. So there are a lot of products which are now unavailable, and there are a lot of highly gifted and educated people, particularly young people who've left the country. And you think about your IT engineers in their 60s retiring, dying, not being replaced by people in their 20s who've left the country. Pilots, likewise, have to prevent pilots going abroad because they're not going to be enough airline pilots, because Russia refuses to certify that they are pilots, so it's trying to prevent them hemorrhaging pilots. But the International Monetary Fund, they drew a different conclusion. They said, yes, sanctions, they've certainly hurt Russia, but not as badly as you think. People were estimating that the Russian economy was going to contract by 12 to 15% this year, but the IMF said the per annum shrinkage is going to be more of the order of 6%. There might be in certain vital areas. So anyway, the Yale report says the additional oil and gas revenue has not compensated for the absence of sanctions. I mean, Aeroflot, they've lost most of their destinations. I think the government will save them coûte to coûte. The minor airlines like Russia and Pobeda probably go bust. The tourist industry is going to be hurt. Who on earth is going to go on holiday to Russia right now? The IT sector, banking, finance, insurance is all going to be hurt. No one's going to reinsure them. So 83% of Russian energy was sold to Europe. 83%. They're oil, gas, and coal. That's not just the European Union. Some non-EU countries like Switzerland, like the United Kingdom. But anyway, so Russia's been selling less oil and gas to try and make the Europeans desperate. I think the Europeans will then have to agree to anything for fear of being cut off altogether. So the European Union has actually cut purchases, is phasing them out. Most EU countries and the United Kingdom stopped buying Russian coal totally already, stopping buying Russian oil by the end of this year, stopping buying Russian gas in a few years. So anyway, so the European Union has faced up to, yeah, we're going to have not a drop of Russian oil or gas. Now, the EU was transitioning away from hydrocarbons anyway, hoping to do so in about 20 years, but perforce is going to do it sooner. So now the decision's been taken, the money's been put into that, and the alternative oil and gas is so expensive anyway, that means green energy is not that much more expensive. So Russia say, fine, we'll just sell the oil and gas to these oil-thirsty, Asian tigers, China and India. And these Asian countries got a limited demand for energy. Their populations are not growing very fast anymore. Even they are wanting to move to green energy, which is becoming a bit more affordable. And plus, pollution is killing so many people. They recognize that pollution and climate change is actually bad for their economy. And yes, Russia can sell more oil and gas to India and China, and it will sell a bit more, but not dramatically more. Nothing like enough to compensate for the loss of the European market. And to sell significantly increased quantities, Russia's going to have to build more pipelines, which is going to take several years. And those are vulnerable to sabotage. And I'm astonished that Ukraine hasn't sent saboteurs in to do that. And also to remind the Chinese that backing Russia is not a cost-free option, that you're going to pay an economic price for it. And more oil tankers, and there's a very limited number of oil tankers in the world. And you can build them, but they're very pricey, and it takes a few years to build. Anyway, so it said that, in brief, Russia needs Europe more than Europe needs Russia. And though it definitely is hurting European economies. So yeah, 1,000 companies either withdrew from Russia in 2022 or stopped operating, and a few more might pull out. I'm surprised the European Union hasn't gone further and said, no, you can't operate, or you're going to have license to operate. There'll be big punishments. You can't go as a tourist unless you get some sort of exemption to visit an elderly relative who's dying or something. Massive fines if you do that. A bit like American sanctions on Cuba. So 5 million Russian jobs are at risk. 5 million out of a working population of something like 90 million. I don't think all those 5 million jobs will be lost, but if even half of them are lost, that's significant. Russian unemployment is fairly low, about 5%, is going to go up to like maybe 8%. Anyway, so retail sales have fallen 15% in 2022. Perhaps not as much as you might expect, but I think continue falling for the next few years. People have less of an affordable income than before. Russia estimated that 20% of its population was below the official poverty line last year. People say in reality, more than that around the official poverty line. The Kremlin lies about everything. Just how much they're lying is debatable. So even the more people are going to be on the official poverty line. So in reality, be up more like 40% under poverty. Now that doesn't mean that they're going to die of starvation. They probably have just enough to eat. But a new pair of boots, that's going to be a major capital outlay for them. Something they could do like once every few years. So there are really going to be no goodies, no disposable income, no treats, no dining out. You can forget about holidays even within Russia. Every penny's going to be spent on survival. And Putin still wants to increase the birth rate. Well, the natural population is decreasing 400,000 a year, more deaths than births, excluding migration, obviously more emigration than immigration. So they're going to be going down several hundreds of thousands of people per year, precisely the opposite of what Putin wanted. All these efforts to increase population, but women refusing to have more than 2 children in almost every case, sometimes having one and sometimes having none, partly because the economic situation is not good enough. They're not paid enough. The cost of living is too high because these sanctions he's provoked and because the money spent on the military and it was not even performing well. So imports are down in all areas. Imports down from China a whopping 50%. Bear in mind, Chinese products are cheap. China is the biggest trade partner. So the Ukraine war actually is hurting China, which is why I think they tacitly will be pushing the Russians to settle, to get something and end the conflict. So the Russian auto manufacturing car sales down from 100,000 a month to 27,000 a month in June 2022. So the motor manufacturing sector is paralyzed due to the dearth of components and machinery, which are imported from sanctioning companies. Moreover, consumers can't afford cars so many. Not much. I say I was going to replace my car this year, but going to have to make my old banger last to next year, even for several more years. If I am going to buy a car, it's going to be a cheaper model, even one of the Russian ones. So people are wisely pessimistic about the economic outlook. So Russian-made cars, they don't have airbags, they don't have these brake locks, they don't have automatic transmissions. They've already got quite a high rate of death on the road. Is going to get higher with the lack of airbags. So gas revenues were meant to provide Russia with permanent economic security. And it's true that the Russian Federation made tens of billions of US dollars of gas revenues each month. I mean, still does. But the Yale report says these sales have been significantly declining since May 2022. Now, some of this is attributable to summertime. It's seasonal. Of course, it goes down, but even seasonally adjusted, it's less than you would expect in an ordinary May. So it's all actually bleak reading. Now, so if the European Union permanently ends Russian energy exports, then the Russian budget is going to have a massive black hole and going to have to fill it by painful spending cuts in healthcare, education, welfare, anything else, infrastructure. And or higher taxes, more borrowing. Who's going to lend to them? The Chinese would see that it'd be very unwise to be a creditor to theirs. So anyway, Russia can survive a couple of years without selling a drop of energy to the European Union. It's got this big national wealth fund. And remember, Russia's got over $300 billion of assets in NATO and EU countries, which were frozen earlier this year. Now, so far, nobody's talked about confiscating that. But if Russia were to cross a Rubicon and carry out a weapons of mass destruction attack in Ukraine, then NATO might take the drastic step of confiscating the assets, using them to arm Ukraine, something like that. But people say that would be a financial war if you really did that. Anyway, so I suppose NATO and EU countries have kept that in reserve. If you cross that red line, that's what we'll do. So it might seem grim reading. None of this means that Putin is going to end the war anytime soon. It's going to be forced to. There's going to be more suffering. They're just going to have to go back a few decades in their living standards. So I think people delude themselves if they think that this war of aggression is going to be ended by sanctions alone. There'd be the totality of sanctions plus arming Ukraine to the teeth, possibly sending them to moral Coventry, the diplomatic isolation banned from the Olympics, that if this leads to massive demonstrations in Russia, and Putin calculates he's got a better chance of perpetuating his regime by ending the war of aggression than by continuing it. That is the point at which he might withdraw, he might settle from some compromise, which is not particularly good for him. I mean, I would love sanctions to succeed, but I just think we kid ourselves if we tell ourselves that's going to happen. Remember, much smaller, much poorer countries have survived more severe sanctions for far longer. North Korea, you could say Iran, South Africa, Saddam Hussein's Iraq. Sanctions on their own almost never do it. Thank you for watching. So remember to follow me on Patreon or donate on Patreon. Remember to look at my George from Ireland website, things like that. Thank you so much. Goodbye.